Hey everyone, Kevin P. McAuliffe here, and I am back again with another Creative Cow tutorial. And in our ongoing look at learning Avid's Media Composer and Symphony, we're on to part 2 of our look at audio mixing. Now you'll remember in part 1 we talked about getting in and actually editing the audio and adding fades in. It's a very visual way to do audio mixing. It's also a very precise way to do audio mixing. Well, in this next lesson, in looking at audio mixing, we're going to take a look at the keyframe method. Now you're going to see that once we get down to it, really the core mixing is very similar to what we did in the previous tutorial, just a very different way to go about doing it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you this method, and then I'm also going to talk about why you might want to choose working in one way over the other to really get the job done as quickly as possible. Okay, short introduction. Let's just get into Symphony and let's get started. Okay, so let's Command Tab into Symphony, obviously an Alt Tab for all of my Windows friends out there, and you'll see we're exactly where we left off in the end of the previous lesson. You can see I can get in, I can take a look, I can see exactly where my audio dips happen. I can see that I've got dissolves in between them. So like I said, a very visual way to mix. Well, let's change things up a little bit. I'm going to keep this layout, but what I'm also going to do here, we'll just call this Visual Audio Mixing. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to duplicate this sequence by pressing Command and D on the Mac, Control and D in Windows. And we're just going to call this Keyframe Based Audio Mixing. Just like such. And what I'm going to do is just double click on that sequence. You'll see that I have that sequence located now inside of my timeline, and I can see it right up here. If I wanted to switch back and forth, I can obviously drop that down and switch back and forth to whatever sequence I happen to have called up in the past. Okay, so the first thing I need to do is just remove all of these effects. I'm just going to hit F5 on the keyboard, which is my shortcut for remove effect. If you don't happen to have remove effect mapped to your keyboard, no problem. You can find it right over here at the top of your timeline. And I'm just doing this so that I can mark an out point, and I'm just going to extend these clips down. So I now just have one piece of music. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to come in and I'm going to set this back to be 0 dB, so it's nice and loud, just the way we had it when we started. So if I come back now, I'm just going to close the mixer here. I hit play. Very loud. And our VO is going to come in. Do you know there's so many things to love? Now, before we go on, I should point out the most important part of working with the keyframe mixing technique is actually having the keyframe command mapped to your keyboard. So let's just make sure it is. What I'm going to do is navigate up to Tools. I'm going to want to make sure I have the command palette open just in case I don't have it mapped. We're going to come into our settings here. Now you'll see that I have menu to button. This is going to be a button to button. What I'm going to do is come all the way down to the keyboard layout here. There we go. And you can see that I do have Add Keyframe mapped to my keyboard. Now obviously if I wanted to add that somewhere else, what I can do is navigate, I believe it's inside the Effects tab, which it is. There's Add Keyframe right there. You know, let's just say I wanted to hypothetically, instead of having, you know, K is for pause, maybe I wanted K for keyframe. You know what, no problem. We can simply remap that however we want on the keyboard. But you know what, I'm going to keep things the way that they are because that's how I'm accustomed to working. What I'm going to do is just close the keyboard. I'm going to close the command palette here. And you'll remember a few lessons ago I talked about the different views that I had set up for my timelines. This is what I call my normal view. Now when I'm going to be doing keyframe mixing, I'm not going to want to have this view because it's a very limited view. You'll see the tracks are very, very thin. It's going to be hard to get in and be, you know, as precise as we need to be. You'll remember that's why I created these different timeline views. And in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to navigate up to volume mixing. I'm simply going to select it, and you'll see now I can actually see where 0 is, which is what I have everything mixed to right now. I'm just going to hit F3 again. You'll remember everything is set at 0 right now except for my voiceover, but that's okay. We're really only dealing with the music right now. So what I'm going to do to actually get in and apply a keyframe, I'm just going to close the mixer because believe it or not, I don't even need the mixer, is I'm just going to come back and let's just say I'm going to have this start 10 frames before the edit. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hold Command on the Mac, Control on Windows to snap to this edit. If I hold that key and I click on an edit, you'll see Media Composer or Symphony will snap to that edit point, a very handy shortcut to have at your disposal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back 10 frames by simply hitting 1 at the top of the keyboard. I'm just going to scroll down a little bit so I can see the 2 tracks that I'm going to be doing my keyframing to, and I'm simply going to add a keyframe by hitting the Add Keyframe button. You'll see there it is right there. Now I know that right now the audio is too hot, and I had it down around -8. So what I'm going to do is simply grab the keyframe, and what I can actually do is once I have it selected, I can hold Shift on the keyboard on both Mac and Windows to select that keyframe on both tracks, and I can now simply grab it and drag it south to get it down at about -8. Now it's a little bit hard to see because this is something that they actually need to fix. Right down here at the bottom where it says volume mixing, you'll see as I adjust my volume, you can actually see the volume adjust there. Now that used to be a lot darker, and that's a little bit of a bug that I'm going to have to log with Avid just to make sure that they fix that. Now, you'll see that I can grab, and I have some pretty good flexibility as to, where I put this. But what if I wanted to snap to, 0 or -3 or -7? All I have to do is hold Command on the Mac control in Windows, and you'll see now that what happens is that I snap to each one of those volume settings. So if I wanted to make sure, let's say I was at -3, there we go. But I think what I'm going to do is stick things at about -7, which is about where we had things at the beginning. I think we had things at -8. -7 is probably pretty good too. That's not too bad. Now, believe it or not, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back to this, these 2 keyframes actually, 1 keyframe on each track, by again holding Command on the Mac, Control on Windows. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump ahead 20 frames to add in my next keyframe. Now I'm actually going to do this mix without actually adjusting any levels to begin with. And I'm going to show you how simple it is to get in and adjust these levels. So let's jump ahead 20 frames by simply pressing the number 2 key on the keyboard twice to jump down 20 frames. Again, we're simply going to hit the Add Keyframe button. Again, hold Command on the Mac control in Windows to snap to this edit. Jump back 10 frames, add a keyframe. Jump forward 20 frames, add a keyframe. Now what's important to also keep in mind is that time is really sort of a state of mind. In this case, I am working in a 24 frame project. But right now, what's actually being displayed for me, and I'm going to show you this up here if I go all the way down here, I'm actually looking at 30 frames per second. But you'll see if I come back here to Format, I am working in a 23976 project. So what's going on? Well, remember, 24 frames, 30 frames, we're still dealing with a second. So what Media Composer or Symfony is actually showing me here is what the conversion would be to 30 frames per second. And how I simply adjust that and get it back to be 24 frames per second is simply click on it. What I'm going to do is navigate over here to Sequence, to Time Code. I'm going to come over here to 24, and we're just going to set that. And now you'll see if I go ahead, it's using a 24 frame time code. So what's going to happen now is that instead of jumping ahead 10 frames, it's going to jump ahead 8 frames. It's going to jump back 8 frames. So that's important to keep in mind. If for some reason you're getting sort of a weird timecode layout and you know that you're in a 23976 or a 24 project, remember the timecode up here can be displayed in whatever frames per second you want to see. It's a very handy feature, but if you don't actually pay attention to what you're doing, you can get tripped up really easily. So I think I'm just going to leave it on 24 since we're working in a 2398 project. Let's come down here. Again, I'm going to step back here 8 frames in this case because we're back to 24 frame time code. I'm just going to add a keyframe. Again, I'm going to jump down twice, add another keyframe. You'll see again, it's a little bit short because we're jumping ahead 20 keyframes, but that's okay for the purposes of what we're doing. Again, I'm going to hit the Add Keyframe button, jump down, hit it again. Okay, so all I'm going to do now is simply select these keyframes in here. I'm going to hold Shift to select them. And what we can do now is just adjust this audio however we want. And again, if I want to snap to and edit, let's just say we're going to go down to, I don't know, about -15. There we go. We're at -15 right now. I'm just going to let that go. Again, we're going to do the exact same thing over here. And what have I just done? Well, I've really just done a quick audio mix. Now here's something else for you. Let's say, these first keyframes here on my fade, I wanted the fade to be a lot longer. Right now this sounds pretty good. Just play this here. Audio will dip down.
There's so many things to love
Very
about
nice.
the Creative Cow.
Here it comes back up again. And in a second we're going to dip down again.
But what I think I
There we
love the
go.
most is just how much different and new information I get from them every day.
And here it comes back up again. It really sounds like a great mix, but here's the problem I have. With these first 2 keyframes, I'll just use these 2 right here. I actually want this dissolve to start a lot earlier. I don't want it to be right here. I'm just going to sort of bring it back, roughly around here. I think it sounds nice right here. So most people come in, they find themselves, either adding, keyframes and then coming down and deleting them. You don't need to do any of that. We can actually just move these keyframes by simply holding Option on the Mac, Alt on Windows, and simply dragging them back. And you'll see, if I try to drag down, it's not going to let me adjust the volume of them, but I'm going to be able to drag them back. Along that, I can shorten them up or lengthen them out just like that. So a very different sounding mix now. Nice long dissolve there.
Do you know, there's so many things to love
Very
about
nice.
the Creative Cow.
So that's really basic mixing using the keyframe method. Now, what is the difference between working with one and working with the other? Well, what's important to keep in mind is that especially at busy post houses, what's going to end up happening is you're going to have editors of varying levels working on things. Now, this is a way that you can work if you choose to. In most cases, what I suggest is if you're the only person working on your system, and you do this every day, get into the habit of working this way. It's a very handy way to work. But for me, here's the problem I run into, especially working in a large post facility. As soon as I switch back to a normal view just like that, all of a sudden, all of my keyframes have disappeared. But I know the keyframes are there because I can actually see a little keyframe icon located right here on the clip itself. Now, I know that the way to get back and to see what's actually going on is I can come back down to my view and I can switch back to volume mixing, and there they are. But if I switch back, there might be people out there that don't know how to get in and adjust these. And I do want to point out that there's another way to actually see what's going on. I can actually come right over here and say, show me the volume, and there is my mix right on my track. So you can see you actually have access to it right here as well. But for me, I'm always accustomed, from sort of old school Media Composer editing to being able to adjust everything at the bottom. So that's how I like to work. The big difference between working this way, you'll see with the fades, and working this way, again, like I said, a very visual way to work. I can see exactly where every edit is, where every dip in the audio is. In this case, I need to know that this keyframe represents the fact that I have to go in and actually look at the volumes in here to see exactly what is going on during my mix. Two different ways to edit audio or to mix audio. In the end, they give you the same result. The question is, which method is best for you, and in a lot of cases, you and your team, to get the job done as quickly as possible. So if you have any questions, you have any comments, or you have any tutorial requests, you can send them to kevinpmcauliffe@gmail.com. This has been Kevin P. McAuliffe. Thanks a lot for watching.